This assembly video is uploading right now, so we're back in the shop. Going to start putting parts back together. I don't know that this is officially the halfway point of the project since I've still got a bunch of cleaning to do, but this is where we actually start putting on new parts. So I'm going to call it the halfway point just to make myself feel better. I've got the new shaft here. I want to make sure everything looks right on it before we start putting everything together. I made sure that this slides up into the differential. Make sure there's no difference in splines or anything manufactured wrong. As you can see, they didn't cut the splines as far down the shaft on this one, but that's okay because the splines, it only engaged into the pinion gear that far. So we're good there. Work your way up. Everything looks good here. Now this section is where the 5.6 cluster rides. You can see where the teeth were worn, where the 5.6 cluster engages. For some reason they separated this, but the teeth only engage in this section here. So it's this section here. It should be fine. Thing looks good. I tried sliding the 5.6 cluster on. It looks like it's going to be a nice tight press fit. Thing looks good here. Looks good there. These splines look a little more squared off, where these are a little rounded, but that shouldn't make any difference. We just end up putting a bearing on the end, so I think we should start assembling. One thing you do need is some transmission fluid. These things use Dexron 3. I like Valvoline. Use whatever you want as long as it's Dex 3 compatible. I'm going to put some in that bowl there so we can put the needle bearings and the synchros, or the blocker rings, make sure everything's covered in fluid as we put it on the shaft. Okay, first off, we'll put on the third gear. One thing I like about automatic transmissions is, or not automatic, well, transmissions in general, is generally everything is clean. Rebuild an engine, everything is filthy. First thing here is the old bearing out of it. We'll take that, set it aside, take the new bearing, coat it in fluid, and I've been wiping off these journals because this new shaft had some thick greasy style fluid on it to protect it from rusting. So the bearing's got a section that fastens. Hey, try that. Bearing's got a section that fastens together like that. Slide it into your gear. Take the gear and slide it gently onto the shaft. Right, next up is that large spacer ring. It slides up in there, up against the gear. Now we go to the synchronizers, to the blocker rings. So we will go over to the kit. This piece is reused because it's just tapered, no friction surfaces. We have this ring here. I guess that's the only ring that gets replaced in this. But it has friction surfaces on the inside and outside. So the new pieces just come in a bag. So you've got to go and compare and make sure you get the right replacement. I don't think that you can screw that up unless you really, really tried. So that is the replacement for that. Put this in the parts pile. All that was covered in fluid, so we'll take and coat this ring in fluid. And it it goes on like that. And then the big ring goes on the outside. And that's the pack. The ring is a little bit tighter fit. Well, a lot tighter fit. A lot tighter fit on the shaft. So I'm going to stand this upright and I'm going to tap that ring down there. But it goes down up against that spacer. And this is where having tabletops with different holes in them helps. Because that sets right down on that machine spacer on the shaft. So now I've got where I can tap that down in place. Okay, the ring is down on there. Wasn't at all hard to get down on there. Just took some gentle tapping. One side to the other. Knocked it down on there. You do not want to get carried away and break that. If you have a piece of tubing that'll slide over this, you can use that to drive it down on there too. Just don't break it. You have a hard time finding another one, most likely. So now we'll set the rest of the synchro pack on there. Next comes this ring that engages that we just drove on. Then the friction. Line up your tabs to drop down in there. And then line that up and set that on top. You've got a nice gap where that tapers onto everything. And then these notches here are where the keys will come in and lock and push on this. And it doesn't take very much pressure to get the synchros to grab. And that's how that works. Okay. Next up, we have the hub and slider. I'm just going to leave that there because that works really nice. But we'll put we're going to put the new billet keys and the new springs in this hub. We'll get the hub all built and then we'll put it on there in one piece. I know I took it apart in two pieces, but you assemble it on the bench, then put it back on the shaft in one piece. Okay, out of the new parts pile, here's the old stamped key, and here's the new billet key. Major upgrade going to the billet keys. So we will pitch these in the recycle bin, because they will never go back in another transmission. All right, the new keys drop into the hub, like so. And you definitely make sure that you've got it in the right spot to where that cutout in this ring is lined up with that groove. Now, the snap rings go in there. Or not snap rings, the springs. And see, they have a little notch on the end. Make sure that they go outside of the two keys. That way it can't rotate around and lose one of the keys. If you know what I mean. Because if you don't get it hooked right, it could end up sliding like this, and then you got one key that doesn't have a spring to it. So put it like that. Roll that in there, and then roll the end of the other one on there. And there's what it looks like with the spring installed. So I'll flip it over and put the other spring on the other side. Okay, finished assembly. And what this lets it do is this hub is mounted solid on the shaft. Okay, when you shift, pulls this ring. It stays in the middle when you're not using that gear. Pulls that ring. See, it takes the key with it, with the outer slider. And that engages your blocker rings to get everything up to speed. And then, see if I can do this without shooting it everywhere. it can go ahead and snap on to where this is engaged. Onto your gear. The keys can stop. They don't have to go any further. They push out of that groove. And then when it comes back, they drop into the groove and they're ready for the next shift. So now this is ready to be put onto the shaft. And just like that little synchronizer ring, this is a lot tighter fit than it was on the old U shaft. So you absolutely can gently tap that down on there like before. But if you have a press, why not use a press? And if you don't have a press, and you're going to work on these transmissions, no more than these presses cost at Harbor Freight, you ought to get a press. So we've got it setting in there. These blocks are setting on that machined ring in the center of the shaft. We've got a socket here that fits the hub. And we should be able to lower that down on there pretty easy. Okay, it is on there. Everything moves. Your inner blocker ring is bouncing back and forth on the keys and the slider. And once we put the rest of it on, I'll show you. I'll slide that down onto that gear. Gear's floating on its bearing. Now, I'm going to tell you, I said you could tap that on because we tapped it off. I'm thinking you need a press, because obviously if you were putting it back on your old shaft, you'd be able to tap it on there because that's how it came off. But this shaft it's a tight enough fit that I would not have wanted to have tapped it all the way on there. So if you don't have a press, go buy one. You're saving enough money by rebuilding this yourself to afford one. And once you have one, you'll be like, how'd I ever get by without it? So I put it on there with a press, and that's how I would recommend doing it. Now we can put the synchronizer, or put the blocker ring and synchronizer assembly on for fourth gear. Here's the fourth gear blocker ring assembly. We'll reuse this piece. This piece gets replaced, and then we'll reuse this and that drive ring. So I need to find a replacement out of the kit for this one. Then we've got the new friction coated in some tranny fluid. Gender neutral shifter juice. Then we'll put this ring on first. Got the shaft back in here. Once again, the notches need to drop down and engage the keys. Next comes the friction in your inner cone. And now we have to put in this drive gear. And I'll probably tap it down because we were able to tap the other one in. It has to go down far enough that we can put the C-clip on it. Okay, now we're down to the clip. Went to the small parts pack, found a replacement clip that is the same size and thickness as the one that's took off. This one goes in the scrap. You have to make sure, focus, that this gap is right to get the clip in there. Now, when I drove this blocking ring driver down on there, it bottomed out against the hub, and yet it wasn't far enough down to get the clip in there. So that tells me the hub was not down on the shaft quite far enough. So back to the press we went, gave it a few more pushes, it popped a couple of times and went all the way down to now we can get the clip in there. But you got to make sure that'll tell you that everything is as far down as it should be. And I went ahead and pressed on this synchro driver, or this blocker ring driver, because it's a solid piece and it lays right on top of the hub. So there was no problem with pressing on it. shoving it on down. So now we're ready to put the clip on. All right, the clip is in there. So that is done as far as 3 and 4, except for putting the bearing on the end. Okay, now that assembly is complete, the snap ring is down in there properly, fully seated. Now all of this stuff, this gear is floating on the shaft. The blocker rings are not doing anything, they're just floating. So when you go to shift, you move this slider. And as that's moving over, now this gear is firmly locked to the output shaft. And as that moves over, it pushes the keys. The keys bring this gear up to the same speed as the shaft, and it all slides together and locks. And then when you pull it out of gear, it just slides like that. Gear and everything's free to move. That would have been 3rd gear, and then you go this way to hit 4th. I'm not going to try that because there's no gear over on this side since it's just the shaft, and I'd end up pulling the slider off and then have to redo everything. So now we can go to 1st and 2nd. All right, just like before, we're going to be sliding on the gear first. It has a big plastic caged bearing. Got a new bearing here. We'll lube it up. Slide everything together. Bearing's in place. Gear is clean. Thing looks good on it. Get up here. Pinch that bearing together. And the gear slides right on, smooth like butter. Next is the Synchro, the blocker ring assembly for 2. It has the big ring here that will get reused, friction here, and an inner ring that is also replaced because it has friction on the inside. So we'll pick these out of the kit. Here's the replacement for the inner. There's the next replacement. And then this is reused. We'll oil them up. It goes on there like that. Intermediate ring. It needs to engage the tabs on the gear. And then reuse your outer ring. Better to assemble them in a pack and then slide the whole mess on there. Okay, that looks good until it fell back off. Next, there's a plastic spacer that goes in here before the hub goes on. And since it is plastic, I did order a new one. Okay, that's to keep the bearing in its proper location. The teeth on the hub should bottom out against this, so we don't have to worry about smashing that spacer. That was what I was concerned with, being that it's plastic. But it is just to hold the bearing up against the back there. That's as far as it goes, because that will hit. I'm not sure when I turned the camera off, but I thought I was filming putting this together. But this goes just like the other one did. The keys go in the slots, the springs go around, lap the little bent ears over the keys, orient them different on each side to where they're not, you know, this one ends here That one ends there. Just so if one end does come off, it's not completely floating around. And then we should be ready to install this. Okay, that hub actually did a pretty good job of just going on there, just tapping it. I've got everything lined up as far as the synchro of the blocker ring teeth. But I was going to show you how I do it in a press. The bottom of that is just setting on a plate. That is a piece of exhaust tubing, but you can use any kind of tubing you want that'll fit down over that main shaft. You'll also need a piece of tubing of some kind like this when you go to put on the 5.6 cluster gear, because it's now a press fit. So we will give that a shove and make sure that hub is all the way down. Which it was not. Yeah, I stopped and checked everything. Wiggled the synchros to make sure, or wiggled the blocker rings to make sure they were still seated like they should be. And this hub has a C-clip. So you know when you've got it down on there, because you'll be able to get that C-clip in the groove. So we need just a little more. Everything's back to moving like it should. And it just bottomed out on the shaft. And now we should have room to put the clip in and then go ahead and assemble the blocker rings on the other side. Here is the new ring. And one thing I failed to mention earlier. See how that ends of those rings are tapered? You want to put the sharp end facing out the direction that it will come off, because that lets you get a hold of it with ease. If you put that tapered part on the inside, if you put it like this, when you try to grab on, it's just going to slide your pliers out. Not a big deal for you now, but the next guy that has to rebuild this is going to be cussing somebody. So put them in with the pointy part out where you can grab onto it. Now we'll slide this baby up on the shaft. Give it a squeeze. Maybe. Get it up on there. There we go. It was the pliers itself that were holding it. Now, work it on in there. Make sure not to jack up your bearing surface. Slide it in there. And that did not bottom out like I wanted. So we'll give it a few taps. So we want that for sure snugly down in the groove. Unlike anything, it's just a matter of the difference in clearances by putting on different parts. Okay, That's all the way down in there now. So we're ready to go back over to the blocker ring pipe. All right, we are getting close to being done with the main shaft. Make sure to go around that snap ring. I tapped all the way around to make sure it was completely seated. I mean, it's a new snap ring. It's possibly a little thicker, different shaft. It just, you have to make sure that it is seated all the way down in that groove. All right. First gear, synchronizer assembly. Inner cone, middle cone, and a reused outer cone. Off to the pilot. Here's the replacement for that. And then your big first gear ring. See that carbon fiber? That's cool. And it's got it inside and out. So we got that. We'll reuse this. I think like before, I'm going to turn this around and stand that up. Okay, we've got the rings. I'm going to go ahead and put them together, the three of them together before I slide it down on there. So here's the big one. This next one, it's got friction material inside and out. Slides in like that. And then this inner cone has the teeth on it that slide in to that first cone. Sure everything lines up. Fits together smooth, should be pretty flat along the back once it's in there. They take this whole assembly, and these key holes here need to line up with the keys on your slider hub. There you go. Now, if you noticed before when I was moving this slider, that spring that goes around the keys was kind of moving in and out with the keys. When this is together, this piece here holds that spring up against the center of the hub. So those springs stay put. The key moves across the top of them. But the spring doesn't move around, so there's very little chance of anything going wrong with the springs. One double check, make sure that we're right in the right spot still. Set that down. Everything turns. Next, there was a spacer. Put it on. Then there was metal bearing. Where the others are plastic, first gear is a metal caged bearing. I went ahead and got a new one. Coated it in oil just like I did on the blocker rings. Put it down. And they sometimes don't want to slide down, so give it a spin. That'll fling the rollers out. Let it drop down on there. Next is the gear. Tapered part toward the synchros. And these notches in the gear line up with the notches on the blocker ring. And there is that. Then your hub goes like that to lock this gear onto the shaft. Goes like that to lock first gear onto the shaft. When it slides down, the gears can move freely. And see how just as soon as that starts moving toward the gear, those blocker rings grab and that can't move anymore. And then as soon as it lets the pressure off, then everything can freewheel. But just boom, first gear, second gear. All right, last thing to go on this shaft is the big roller bearing. It is a 255-72. The big old NTN bearing. We're going to put this one right back in the box. I probably could have got by with leaving these bearings in there, but I just hate to do that. Go ahead and roll this in the oil a little bit. Won't hurt anything. Slide that down And you've got everything. You can see the little groove where the O-ring was originally. So that's in good shape. Everything's in its proper position. And that is an assembled main shaft as far as we need it right now. Got first through fourth ready to go. That's probably one of the hardest parts on the transmission. So I'm going to set this aside. Next video, we will take the input shaft. Well, I've already got the input shaft out. We'll clean up the faceplate, put new seals in it, new bearings on the input shaft, start sliding that together, bearings on the counter shaft, and then we can put this and the counter shaft back in the case. Or at least back on the faceplate. All right, I'm going to stop this video here. As always, thanks for watching.